I stood in the empty space where my Norton had lived for 51 years, staring at the small puddle of oil that had darkened the concrete over the decades, and I understood for the first time in my marriage that my wife had never seen me at all. Not really. The garage smelled of petrol and old leather, and the faint sweetness of the lanolin I rubbed into the saddle every Sunday morning before church, but the bike itself was gone, and with it, the last thing my father had pressed into my hands before the coronary took him on the front lawn in Christchurch in 1971. My wife stood in the doorway holding a glass of Riesling, and she was smiling the way a person smiles when they think they have done you a favor you are too thick to recognize. $22,000, love, she said. Cash. The Aussie chap drove down from Auckland with the notes in a leather satchel. We can finally do the kitchen. The Caesarstone benchtop your sister-in-law has, the one in Remoura. I did not turn around. I think if I had turned around in that moment, I might have done something I could not take back. And I have spent 63 years learning that the men in my family ruin everything when they speak too soon. So I stood there and I looked at the oil stain, and I let her keep talking. Because she always kept talking. And the longer she talked, the more rope she gave me. Don't sulk, Edmund, she said. It was just sitting there. You haven't ridden it properly since your knee operation. The grandchildren were going to bump into it eventually, and someone would get hurt. Beatrice agrees with me. So does Marcus. We took a vote at Sunday lunch while you were at the return services. I asked her, very quietly, if she had taken anything else. She laughed. She actually laughed. The way you laugh at a child who has asked an obvious question, and she said no. Of course not. Just the old motorbike. What else would there be? And I closed my eyes, and I listened to the oyster catchers calling out over the harbor, and I made a decision that I did not share with her. Not then. Not for a very long time afterward. My name is Edmund Whitcombe. I am 67 years old. I was born in a little cottage in Sumner in 1959, the year the Wahin ferry was still running and my father was still working for the New Zealand Railways as a fitter and turner, and the Norton Commando 850 that my wife sold for $22,000 was, in fact, worth 198,000 New Zealand dollars on the international vintage market. But I will get to that. I will get to all of it. The bike was a 1973 Commando 850 Mach 1A. And my father bought her brand new from Bryden Motorcycles on Manchester Street the year before he died. He paid £1,498 for her, which was nearly 3 months of his fitter's wages, and he did it because his own father had ridden a Norton through the western desert in the war and had come home with shrapnel in his hip and a story about a particular night outside Tobruk that he told only once, to me, the summer before he passed in 1968. My grandfather said the Norton was the only thing that did not let him down. Not the army, not the British command, not the bloody politicians. Only the Norton. And so when my father bought his own Commando in 1973, it was not a vehicle. It was an inheritance and a promise and a kind of prayer all at once. And when he handed me the keys on the veranda of our house in Sumner in October of 1971, the morning before the coronary, although neither of us knew it, he said, "Edmund, you keep this one running. You keep her running, and you remember where you came from." I kept her running for 51 years. I rebuilt the gearbox 3 times. I sourced an original Amal carburetor from a man in Hamilton who had bought a wrecked Commando in 1979 and kept the parts in his shed for 40 years, before he died. And his widow rang me at 6 in the morning to ask if I wanted them. I learned to braze. I learned to lap valves by hand. I learned the particular way the Mach 1A wants to be coaxed into life on a cold Christchurch morning, the way you have to pull the choke. Not all the way out, but about 3/4. And you have to give her 2 soft kicks before the 3rd one that wakes her. And if you rush her, she will sulk for an hour. I knew that bike the way some men know their wives, which is perhaps part of the problem. I met my wife Heather in 1982 at a dance at the Sumner Surf Life Saving Club. She was a primary school teacher then, 24 years old, and she wore a green dress and she laughed at my jokes, and I thought she was the most luminous thing I had ever seen. We married in 1984. We had 2 children, Marcus in 1986 and Beatrice in 1989, and I spent 38 years working as a heavy diesel mechanic at the Littleton port, which is honest work and good work, but it is not glamorous work, and I think Heather always felt, somewhere underneath, that she had married down. Her sister, Annette, married a chartered accountant who ended up on the board of a dairy cooperative, and the comparisons were never spoken aloud, but they sat at our kitchen table at every Christmas dinner like an extra guest no one wanted to acknowledge. The children grew up. Marcus is 39 now, an estate agent in Auckland, and he has the smooth voice of a man who has learned that smiling while you take something from someone is more profitable than scowling. Beatrice is 36, a marketing manager for a wine company in Marlborough, and she has spent her adult life curating a version of her childhood that bears very little resemblance to the one I remember. They both think I am a relic. They have both told me so, in their own ways. Over the years, Beatrice, through gentle teasing about my old man hobbies, Marcus, through the more direct observation made at his 35th birthday lunch, that Dad still thinks it's 1975. The Norton lived in the garage at the back of our house in Kashmir. After my knee operation in 2023, I stopped doing long rides. I would still take her out on a fine Saturday and run her down to Littleton and back, just to keep the carbs clean and the seals supple, but Heather had decided without telling me that this constituted not really using it. And in early March of this year, while I was at the Returned Services Association lunch with my old workmate Rangi and a man we called Shorty who had served in Vietnam and never quite come back from it, my wife let a man from Auckland into our garage and watched him load my father's Norton onto a trailer. She forged my signature on the change of ownership form. She did it with my own pen, the Silver Cross pen Marcus gave me for my 60th birthday. She copied my signature from an old electricity bill she found in the kitchen drawer. The buyer, a man called Damon Pritchard who runs a vintage motorcycle dealership in Parnell, did not ask too many questions because the price was $22,000 and the bike was, by any honest valuation, worth at least 4 times that even at a casual glance. He paid her cash from a leather satchel because that is how men like Damon Pritchard prefer to do business, and he drove away with the Norton on the trailer, and my wife went to the bottle shop on the corner and bought a bottle of Babich Pinot Noir and waited for me to come home so she could surprise me with what she called, later, a clever bit of housekeeping. I came home at 4 in the afternoon. I walked through the back gate, and I saw the garage door open. And I saw the empty space. And I saw the oil stain. And I felt something in my chest that I had not felt since my father died, which was the particular cold understanding that the world had just become a smaller and meaner place. Heather came out with the wine glass and the smile, and I have already told you what she said. I did not shout. I did not cry. I went inside and I sat at the kitchen table, and I asked her for the buyer's name and the dealership and the address. She gave them to me, still smiling, still believing she had done something clever. And she said, "Edmund, you'll thank me. Honestly. The kitchen will be lovely." I wrote the details down on the back of an envelope. I put the envelope in my pocket. I made a cup of tea, and I drank it slowly, and I went to bed at 9, and I did not say another word to her that night. The next morning, I rang my old friend Patrick O'Donnell, who had been a constable in Christchurch for 31 years before he retired in 2019. And I asked him a question. I asked him what the law said about a wife who forged her husband's signature on a vehicle ownership transfer. Patrick was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "Edmund, that is a forgery offense under the Crimes Act. 1961, Section 256. It carries up to 10 years. and the sale itself is voidable. The buyer never had clean title, regardless of what he paid. I thanked him. I asked him if he could put me in touch with a solicitor who specialized in this sort of thing, and he gave me the name of a woman in town called Helena Voss Mackay, who had a small practice on Hereford Street and a reputation for being precise. I rang her at 10 that morning. I had an appointment by 11. I drove into the city in the old Hilux, and I sat in her office. And I told her the whole story from the beginning, my grandfather in the desert, my father on the veranda, the 51 years, the kitchen renovation, the leather satchel. She listened. She did not interrupt. When I was finished, she took off her reading glasses, and she said, "Mr. Whitcombe, this is a clear-cut matter. Your wife has committed forgery. The buyer has received stolen property, whether or not he knew it at the time of purchase, although I suspect he had a fair idea given the price. We will recover the bike. We will also need to discuss what you want to do about your wife. That is a separate question. And it is one I cannot answer for you." I told her I needed to think. She said that was sensible. She said most people in my position made their decisions too quickly and regretted them. She said the law could wait a few days. The bike was insured. The buyer was not going to ride it down the motorway. We had time. I should go home and think. I should not tell my wife anything. I should observe. So I went home. And I observed. For 3 weeks I observed. I came home each day and I made tea, and I asked Heather about her day. And she told me about the kitchen showroom and the Caesar stone samples and the conversation she had had with Beatrice about the splashback tiles. And I nodded and I said, "That sounds nice, love." And I observed. I noticed that she had told her sister Annette already. I noticed that Marcus had rung from Auckland and laughed about it, and that Beatrice had driven up from Blenheim for the weekend specifically to look at kitchen catalogs with her mother. I noticed that not one of them, not my wife, not my son, not my daughter, not my sister-in-law had asked me how I felt about the Norton being gone. Not one of them had said the word sorry. The bike, in their minds, had simply been removed, the way you remove a stain from a carpet. A small inconvenience efficiently dispatched, on a Sunday lunch at our house, 3 weeks after the sale. With all of them gathered around the table, Marcus down from Auckland, Beatrice down from Blenheim, Annette and her chartered accountant husband Jeffrey, my own grandchildren Lily and Tobias chasing each other around the lemon tree in the garden, Marcus raised his glass and said, "To Mum, for finally getting Dad's old rust bucket out of the garage. About time." And they all laughed. Jeffrey said something about how it was nice to see Heather taking charge of the household assets. Beatrice said the kitchen was going to be transformative. Heather smiled at me down the length of the table, the same smile from the doorway, and she said, "Edmund's been a very good sport about it. Haven't you, love?" I lifted my glass. I smiled back at her. I said, "I have, haven't I?" Then I went into the kitchen, and I rang Helena Voss Mackay on her mobile, and I told her to proceed. She proceeded the next morning. The Christchurch police, acting on a sworn affidavit and a forensic comparison of my actual signature against the one on the transfer form, contacted the Auckland police, who attended the premises of Pritchard Vintage Motorcycles in Parnell at 9:45 on a Tuesday morning. Damon Pritchard was in his office drinking a flat white when the two constables walked in and explained that the 1973 Norton Commando 850 currently displayed in his showroom had been sold to him by a person who did not have legal title to it, and that the bike was now subject to a recovery order, and that he would also like to come down to the station and answer some questions about his due diligence procedures. Damon Pritchard rang my wife at 10 o'clock that morning, screaming, "Why are the police in my showroom? You told me your husband signed the form. You told me he was at the return services." Heather was at the kitchen showroom in Riccarton when the call came through. She told me later that she had to sit down on a display stool because her legs gave way. She told me later that she rang Marcus first, and Marcus told her not to panic, that there had clearly been a misunderstanding, that he would drive down from Auckland that evening and they would sort it out as a family. She rang Beatrice second. Beatrice cried on the phone and then asked if this meant the kitchen was off. Heather rang Annette third. Annette said, "Heather, what on earth have you done?" I was at home when she walked through the door at 4 in the afternoon. I was in the garage, sweeping the empty space where the Norton had been, even though it did not need sweeping. She stood in the doorway with the same wine glass, except this time it was empty and her hand was shaking, and she said, "Edmund, the police." The police rang Damon. He says the police are involved. He says you've reported it. He says he might lose his license. I leaned the broom against the wall. I looked at her properly for the first time in 3 weeks. I said, "Heather, you forged my signature. You sold my father's motorbike. You have committed a criminal offense under the Crimes Act of 1961, Section 256, and the bike is being recovered. And Damon Pritchard is being interviewed about whether he knew what he was buying. I have engaged a solicitor. Her name is Helena Voss Mackay, and she has a small office on Hereford Street. And I have known about all of this for 3 weeks. She stared at me. She stared at me the way a person stares at a stranger who has walked into their house wearing their husband's clothes. She said, "3 weeks?" I said, "3 weeks." She said, "But Marcus said, and Beatrice said, and Annette said, it was just a thing that wives do, to get the husband to finally fix the kitchen. Annette said, Jeffrey lets her do it all the time. She said it was normal. She said you would forgive me by Easter." I said, "Heather, the bike was worth $198,000. She did not understand at first. She looked at me as if I had spoken in Maori, which she has never bothered to learn despite living in this country her entire life. I had to repeat myself. I said the number again, and I told her that the bike was a 1973 Mk1A Commando in fully matching numbers original condition with documented provenance back to my grandfather's service in the New Zealand Expeditionary Force, and that there were perhaps 11 of them left in the world in that condition, and that a Japanese collector in Yokohama had been in correspondence with me through a vintage motorcycle club in Hamilton for 3 years, offering to buy her for the sum I had just stated, and that I had refused every time, because she was not for sale. I told her that Damon Pritchard had known exactly what he was buying when he handed her the satchel, which was why he had come to her himself rather than sending an agent, and which was why he had paid in cash, and which was why he had not asked too many questions about the signature. She sat down on the concrete floor of the garage, in her good slacks, and she began to cry. I did not comfort her. Marcus arrived from Auckland at 9 that night. He came straight to the garage, where I was now sitting in the old wicker chair I had pulled in from the veranda, drinking a beer. He had his estate agent voice on. He said, "Dad, look, I think we all need to take a breath here. Mum made a mistake. She admits that. But the police, Dad, that's a bit much. That's family. We don't do that to family." Beatrice arrived an hour later. She had driven through the night from Blenheim, and she had the puffy red face of a woman who had been crying since lunchtime. She said, "Daddy, please. Mum will lose everything. She could go to prison. Daddy." She's 68. I looked at my son. I looked at my daughter. I thought about all the Christmases and all the birthdays and all the Father's Days when they had given me socks and supermarket vouchers and rolled their eyes at the photographs of the Norton on the veranda. I thought about Marcus's 35th birthday lunch and the comment about 1,975. I thought about Beatrice's wedding in 2014 when she had asked me not to ride the Norton to the venue because it would ruin the photos. I said, "Marcus, your mother committed a serious criminal offense. She did so because she did not respect me, did not respect my father. did not respect my grandfather, and because she has spent 38 years thinking that what mattered to me was a hobby, and what mattered to her was real life. Your aunt told her it was normal. You and your sister voted on it at a Sunday lunch. None of you asked me. None of you asked me once, in 3 decades, why the bike mattered. So you do not get to tell me now that this is a family matter. It stopped being a family matter when you took the vote without me at the table. Marcus said, Dad, that's not fair. I said, Marcus, fair is a word people use when they are losing an argument they deserve to lose. Beatrice said, Daddy, please. Mum is sorry. I said, Beatrice, your mother is not sorry. Your mother is frightened. There is a very large difference. And you will understand it one day if you are lucky. And you will spend the rest of your life trying to forget it if you are not. I did not raise my voice. I have not raised my voice once in this entire account, and I did not raise it then. I finished my beer. I went to bed in the spare room. I had moved my things into the spare room 3 weeks earlier, on the day after the sale, and Heather had not noticed because Heather had been too busy with Caesar stone samples to walk down the hall to where her husband was sleeping. The Norton came home on a Thursday morning, on a flatbed truck, escorted by a private recovery agent that Helena had arranged. I was in the garage when she arrived. I walked out into the driveway and I watched the men unload her. And when they wheeled her over the threshold and back onto the oil stain, I put my hand on the saddle and I felt the cold leather warming under my palm, and for the first time since I had stood in that empty doorway, I let myself feel something. I will not describe what I felt, because some things are not for describing. I will say only that my father was there in the garage with me. And my grandfather was there too. And the 3 of us stood around the bike for a long moment before the world resumed. The criminal proceedings against Heather were, in the end, less dramatic than the family had feared. Helena negotiated a guilty plea on a reduced charge. Heather received 12 months of supervision and was ordered to pay reparations and undertake 180 hours of community service at a charity shop in Sydenham. She did not go to prison. I had told Helena, privately, that I did not want her to go to prison. I had told Helena that what I wanted was the truth on the public record, and a sentence that Heather would carry with her for the rest of her life, every time she met a new neighbor, and had to explain why she had to ring a probation officer on Tuesdays. Damon Pritchard's dealership lost its license for 18 months. He has since reopened under his wife's name, which is the sort of thing men like Damon Pritchard do. And he has not contacted me again, which is the sort of thing I expected. I filed for divorce on the first Monday after the Norton came home. The divorce was finalized in October. Heather kept the house in Kashmir because I did not want it. I kept the workshop in Sumner that had been my father's, and I kept a small flat above a bakery in Littleton that I had bought 20 years ago as an investment and had been quietly renting out to a young couple who were sad to see me move in, but who understood. I changed my will. I had drafted the new one with Helena over a long afternoon in her office, and I left the bulk of my estate to the New Zealand Return Services Association and to a charity in Christchurch that teaches young people from difficult backgrounds how to repair small engines. I left a small bequest to each of my grandchildren, Lily and Tobias, in trust until they are 25, with a letter to be opened on that birthday explaining why their grandmother and their father and their aunt are not in the will. I did not write the letter in anger. I wrote it the way my grandfather might have written it, which is to say, plainly, and only once. Marcus has not spoken to me since. Beatrice rings every 6 weeks or so. The conversations are short and careful. She has stopped asking me to forgive her mother. She has started, very slowly, asking me about my father and my grandfather. And last Christmas, she asked if I would send her a photograph of the Norton, which I did, and which she has, I am told, framed in her hallway in Blenheim. It is not enough. But it is something, and at 67 years old I have learned that something is often what you have to work with. I ride the Norton most Saturdays now, weather permitting. I have joined a vintage motorcycle club in Christchurch, 15 of us. Mostly men in their 60s and 70s. 2 women, one of them a former physiotherapist who rides a Triumph Bonneville her father bought in 1968. We meet at a cafe in Akaroa one Sunday a month. We do not talk much about our families. We talk about gearboxes and carburetors and the particular quality of light over the Banks Peninsula in autumn, and we ride together up the winding road to the lookout, and then we ride home. And that is enough. I want to say something now that I would like the younger people listening to hear, because I am 67, and I have earned the right to say it once, plainly, and only once. The things you carry from your parents and your grandparents are not just objects. They are not stuff. They are not clutter. They are the only honest history most of us will ever have. Because the official histories are written by people who were not in the room. And the family stories get smoothed over at every retelling. And in the end, the only thing that remembers truly is the object, the watch, the rifle, the fishing rod, the motorbike, the fountain pen, the wedding ring, the carved bowl your great-grandmother brought from Croatia in a wooden trunk in 1923. When someone in your family treats those things as junk, they are not just being thoughtless. They are telling you, very clearly, that they do not believe your history is real. Listen to them when they tell you that. Believe them the first time. Do not spend 38 years hoping they will change their mind. And to the men of my generation, the men who grew up being told that a real man does not make a fuss, that a real man swallows it, that a real man keeps the peace at any cost. I will tell you what my father told me on the veranda in October of 1971, the morning before he died, and what it took me 51 years to understand. He said, "Edmund, keep her running, and remember where you came from." I thought he meant the bike. I thought he meant the Norton. He did not. He meant me. He meant the part of me that knew what mattered. He meant the dignity. The bike was just the thing he had to point to, so I would understand. Keep yourselves running. Remember where you came from, and if someone in your house tries to sell off the part of you that matters, for a kitchen benchtop or a holiday or a clever little win at a Sunday lunch, do not shout. Do not cry. Do not argue. Go and ring a solicitor on a Monday morning and observe for 3 weeks, and then let the law and the truth do what shouting and crying and arguing never will. The Norton is in the garage tonight, on the oil stain that has been there since 1973. Outside, the harbor is quiet, and the oyster catchers are calling, and the light is the particular gold of a Canterbury evening in autumn. I am 67 years old. I am a heavy diesel mechanic. Retired. Of Littleton. My father's name was Walter Whitcombe, and my grandfather's name was Cyril Whitcombe, and my own name is Edmund. And I will keep her running. And I will remember where I came from, until the day I do not. That is the whole of it. That is everything I have to say.